Welcome into this week's edition, albeit a little bit late, of AWA Unleashed. We are the self-proclaimed preeminent #1 podcast dedicated to reliving the memories and telling the stories of the American Wrestling Association. And today, we truly do live up to that moniker because we have got maybe one of the most in-demand shows that takes you through a lot of the memories, some of the most famous and unforgettable moments in the history of the American Wrestling Association, and that is some of the memories of All-Star Wrestling. Now, I will say this is going to be part 1 of 2. So if you submitted it, and we got a lot of submissions to awaunleashedpodcast@gmail.com. If you've got any suggestions, you got an idea, hit us up there. But we got a lot of suggestions. So Mick and Joe and I, we put together this list. Well, mostly Mick, but I like to take credit because it's what I do. I'm a piggybacker. I like to ride the coattails. That being said, 2 guys that I do ride the coattails of is Mick Karch and Polish Joe. And guys, thank you for doing the work today.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
You know, if you ride our coattails, pal, you're in for a bumpy road. I mean, this is hang on tight because
But they're so big. They're big coattails.
I just hope you've got protection.
I'm not gonna never mind.
Wow.
Okay, so
just before we get started, just as a caveat to what you said, Chris, these are in no particular order because when people think about All-Star Wrestling, they don't think in any chronological order. Oh, I remember this. Hey, what about? So that's kind of the way we did this as well. And
it just kind of pops up like one kind of adds to another. Is that? I mean, that's kind of. I think that's how most people work. I mean, wouldn't you say, Joe?
I agree. I mean, we're presenting memories. We're not an Encyclopedia Britannica. By the way, do those even exist anymore? I mean, what the hell you need an encyclopedia for?
Hey, Joe, 1984 called. They want their pop culture reference back.
I can't hear you. I got to go take my Geritol or Gerispeed.
Gerispeed, yeah.
You know, Dynapower and get it over with.
Oh God, that'd be the end all. The one thing that we should also remind people who may have been misled thinking we're going to have footage, we can't. You know, we've explained this before. We can't do it.
We don't own it. We cannot legally play that. We do not own it. And out of respect for the individuals that do, well, plus I just don't want a lawsuit, but it's the right thing to do. So we can talk about it. But yes, there's only so far we can go with it.
Well, yeah. And I have to add in there that some of the angles or some of the situations that we're going to be talking about today don't exist,
and that's true
anymore. Back in those days, if it was live, Vern didn't record a lot of those shows. And then when he did record, a lot of them were recorded over for future shows because the videotape, keeping in mind, I mean, back into the 60s, we're talking about 2-inch videotape, a huge reel. Those were expensive as hell. And Vern didn't want to spend the money on it. He probably could have afforded it. And in hindsight, he should have. But that's just, unfortunately, the way the AWA did their video production. It was just the live show. Well, the house shows was really all that mattered. The TV show is just...
It was a commercial.
It was an infomercial for the upcoming event.
And I will say, in Vern's defense to that, Joe, that I feel like that's just the way that a lot of promotions worked when you're going from market to market. You're giving these people the tape, the reel, the video, whatever. You don't know that, 30, 40, 50 years down the road, people are going to want to see that. So you're thinking week to week, but I think that was fairly common for pretty much any territory.
Well, I mean, when you're in the 60s, it was really just sort of, I don't want to say the start of television, but back in that time, the thought of reruns and the foresight to know what we have today, and that's where you can watch anything and everything pretty much at will on YouTube or Hulu or Tubi, whatever the hell you've got. It just, there was no thought of, hey, let's keep this maybe down the road we can replay this on another TV show. It did not matter to the AWA and quite frankly to others. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, like even the early Tonight shows with Johnny Carson and Jack Parr, those were live. They were not recorded. And so they're lost forever. Yeah. So that, and combined with the fact that we don't own this footage, and hey, little caveat, if you really want to try to see a lot of this stuff, I would say the majority of what we're going to go over today, just search it up on YouTube and somebody has posted it on there.
Yep. There you go.
Well, before we get to that, I do want to thank our sponsors, Soda Stick. They're the home where you can get your AWA Unleashed swag. We've got the t-shirts. We still got the hoodies, but the t-shirts right now, because we're in summertime, go to sodastickco.com. Let me get that right there. Okay. You'll see it right there in the bottom of the screen. Use the promo code Unleashed for 15% off. You can get your AWA Unleashed t-shirts, still have them available. And also, if you're like me and you like Body by Pizza, no better pizza than 7th Avenue Pizza. Just go to 7thavenuepizza.com, and it's pretty much all over the metro area. I want to thank Matt and everybody at 7th Avenue for their support, for the last year and a half. We got more things going, guys. I mean, we got things we just haven't had a chance to work on because of schedules. Before we get into it, I know it's been about a week, maybe a little over a week, Mick, and we lost another legend. And this one, I don't know if there's anybody that maybe has transformed themselves from so hated to so beloved. I mean, the wrestling personality and the pop culture icon, they're like two completely different people, but the one and only Iron Sheik.
Every week we say, boy, we hope we don't have to do this again next week, because this seems to be a recurring theme. We're losing so many of the legends from the bygone era. But the Iron Sheik, as you said, what a great descriptor there, Chris, because this guy may have been the single most hated villain in the history of wrestling, and that's Khosrow Vaziri, the Iron Sheik. That, of course, is one of his Olympic pictures right before he got started with Vern Gagne's training camp way back in the early 70s. And then on the right, the most recent photos of Iron Sheik. You can't say enough about this guy. You hear the term legend over and over again, but honest to God, Khosrow Vaziri, considering where he was, what he came to, or what he came with to this country, his small beginnings, and then, a champion just all over the place, and then to transform himself into the American hating, United States, USA, whatever. It's just incredible. And I love the guy. I know Kaz from the time he got into the business, and his feud with Hulk Hogan, of course, legendary, one of the greatest transforming feuds in the history of wrestling, changed the business. So God bless you, Khosrow.
Let me ask you one thing about the Iron Sheik when it comes to that, Joe, Mick, before you step in, Joe. And I know that's WWF, would it have happened, would Hulkamania have been jump-started like that in the WWF if it wasn't the anti-American hating Iron Sheik? If it was anybody else, any other heel, would it have worked like that? Would it have gotten that hot in the WWF?
No. I would, you could mix and match heels, of that era. But I think, considering Hulk Hogan was the all-American guy at that time, the beach bum, blonde, tanned, and here you got this Iranian American hating SOB. It was absolutely the right choice. And of course, remember, Iron Sheik took out another all-American guy in Bob
Backlund. Yes. Yep.
So the whole setup was perfect, and Hulk was so hot at the time. Iron Sheik was absolutely the choice. He was the go-to.
I think he was the best choice, but I personally think no matter who Hulk Hogan would have gone against at that time, Hulkamania was going to run wild. It already was running wild in the AWA. So to take that and go to New York on the, hate to say this, on the grander stage, because it is New York, I guess technically Connecticut, but we've just always called it, he's going to New York.
Yeah.
But Hulk Hogan was going to have his rise no matter what. But again, going against the Iron Sheik, yes, the best choice. I got to say one thing about the passing of, actually, let's go before the passing of Iron Sheik. Probably one of my favorite personalities that I would follow on Twitter. Fuck Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
Fuck. I mean, and by the way, it was all a work.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It was all a work. Fuck Taylor Swift.
Fuck the jabroni. Yeah.
He was absolutely hilarious. And I think he just developed that cult following. And I give him credit. He kept the gimmick going. He did not break kayfabe. So, Kaz, thank you. Thank you for keeping that alive for, at least until you've passed away. And I will miss those posts. And one other thing about Khosrow, arguably, he came from arguably the greatest training camp in the history of professional wrestling. I mean, absolutely fun. You look at that, and it was a who's who of stars that were going to be appearing in the 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s.
Yeah. So who was it? Tell us briefly, Joe, who was in that camp?
Oh, and Mick, correct me if I'm wrong on some of these, but it was Khosrow, Playboy Buddy Rose, Sergeant Slaughter.
Sergeant Slaughter, and in that era, that same era where Vern was running these camps every year, Ric Flair was in there. I mean, let's not forget him. Of
Chris Taylor.
Chris Taylor. Yeah, it was just a remarkable training camp. And Khosrow, God bless you, as Bobby Heenan said, I forget what WrestleMania, when they were doing the Old Timers Legends Battle Royal, and Khosrow was making his way to the ring, and Bobby said by the time he gets here, it'll be next WrestleMania.
It was. I think that was 17. That was the gimmick battle royal, and he won because he couldn't go over the top rope.
That's right. He couldn't.
By the time he gets to the ring, it'll be WrestleMania 38.
There you go. Yeah, and and Kaz could barely get under the ropes, let alone get over the top rope. But God bless him, a legend, and he'll never be forgotten.
Iran #1, Russia #1, USA 2.
There you go. Excellent.
I just need to know who's going to tell me to go fuck myself in all caps every day now.
Everybody.
I volunteer.
Okay. Joe, every morning, I want you to tell me in all caps on Twitter, go fuck yourself.
Well, in lieu of doing that today, Chris, go fuck yourself.
Careful. The man's choking.
Oh, right.
I was not expecting.
It was not me. I did not have my hands on his throat.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to the business at hand here, guys. It's part 1 of 2, so we're going to break this up. So let's go ahead and just get right into it here, guys. Look at my spreadsheet, and we're going to start with a couple of the early ones. And first of all, Mick, take me through the first couple of ones here. I'm going to let you set it up because these are ones that are important in the sense that they were not doing many of these angles on TV. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, it was not crash TV back then when you had a million different angles going at one time. And wrestling fans today just don't understand that. I mean, they don't get it. And I'm not angry with them. I understand completely. It was a different era. They would very sparingly do an angle on television. And one of those, and a couple of people actually remembered this, that is the former AWA Tag Team Champions of the World back in 1962. That's Doug Gilbert on the left and Dick Steinborn on the right. And they were called Mr. High and Mr. Lowe because Doug Gilbert was the aerial attack and Dick Steinborn was more of the mat wrestler. They did an angle back then when Gilbert and Steinborn were teaming up. Dick Steinborn was an amateur photographer, allegedly, and he was scouting this tag team, the Kalmakoff brothers. Ivan and Carol Kalmakoff. That's them. They're holding the leash. They're not on the leash. The Kalmakoff brothers. And the angle was that Dick Steinborn would take his camera to ringside, and he would photograph and scout the Kalmakoff brothers for a future match. Well, turns out, as the story goes, the camera that he used was a hand-me-down from his dear old grandfather. And needless to say, the Kalmakoff brothers at one point decided they had enough of Dick Steinborn shooting pictures. They not only attacked Dick, but God damn it, they broke the camera. Yes, I know, Joe. They took that camera, that old Browning.
Sons of bitches.
Horrible.
Sons of bitches.
Horrible.
Sons of bitches.
Damn
it was just horrible. And for a kid, I'm looking at this and I damn near lost it. They smashed the camera on the TV studio floor, and with it, of course, went the footage of the Kalmakoff brothers and everything else. But the fact that it was an heirloom, a family heirloom, and that, ladies and gentlemen, was how big wrestling angles were in the day. You could make a mint off somebody's broken camera.
Wow.
Incredible. And the Kalmakoffs eventually won the World Tag Team title, by the way.
What I like about that is the simplicity.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'll add that, to me, that's what made it a little bit more believable. You could believe that, not a Mark Henry impregnating some, Mae Young at 89 years old or whatever she was.
Oh my God.
It wasn't a far-fetched angle. It was something that you could believe that helped tied in to what at the time was a much more believable product, if you will.
Yep. Perfect. Yep. And again, ladies and gentlemen, we're taking you back just to kind of give you that history of, like Joe said, the simplicity of how easy it was to get something over.
Let's talk about the next one here, guys. The Stan Kowalski and the Joe Scarpello knee drop.
Again, here you go. The basic, most simple premise in the world. Stan Kowalski and Joe Scarpello. Stan, of course, Minneapolis native, again, former world tag team champion along with Tiny Mills. And Joe there's Big Stan. Don't ever call him the Big K. He hated that name. Stan Kowalski. Joe Scarpello, on the other hand, was a friend of Vern Gagne's, a tremendous amateur wrestler from Iowa. And Joe was a pretty good little pro. And the angle that they did was they were going to test the stomach muscles of Joe Scarpello because Joe was in terrific shape. And Stan Kowalski offered to jump off the ring rope onto the stomach of Joe Scarpello because Stan said, you're never going to withstand a 280-pound guy coming down on your stomach. You lay down, I'm going to do this. And, of course, Stan jumped on his throat. Stan, the dastardly Stan Kowalski, he must have misfired. Stan said it was an accident. He didn't have his trajectory quite right. But instead of going on the stomach, he went and landed on the throat of Joe Scarpello, put Joe out of action. The interesting thing is, wrestling in the day was perceived as a sport. They wrote it up in the Minneapolis Tribune. They actually wrote an article.
And that's incredible. I mean, that's incredible when you think about it.
Isn't that something? They did. They said Joe Scarpello has been injured by a knee drop from Stan Kowalski, and he is out of action. And they took it seriously, or at least seriously enough to appeal to the listeners. But Joe Scarpello, a great amateur wrestler. Joe was about 5'7", and Stan, of course, about 6'3". But again, jumped that knee right into the throat of Joe Scarpello. Early on angles in the AWA.
I love the simplicity. I really do. Just it's just such a different era. I do miss it. God.
Yeah, I got it.
Well, but it's simple. But I got to say the brilliance of it.
Sure.
The brilliance of the simplicity. Just a simple jump off of the top rope, not doing what you say you're going to do. You go across the guy's throat, boom, you got instant ticket sales. I love it.
And, just as an aside, if you think about it, when they made the movie The Wrestler, they kind of brought that back because, as I recall, Ray Stevens did his bombs away top rope onto Jack Cutter, and he killed Jack Cutter, who actually was played by Joe Scarpello. So, history kind of repeated itself. But again, the very early days of wrestling when people believed.
Well, back in that day, Mick, wrestling repeated itself quite often.
Yeah.
You stuck around, long enough and were a fan long enough, you'd see a similar angle, we'll say, just with a couple of different people.
And it was so and I mean, admittedly, this is before my time, but you guys are talking about the simplicity. You can enjoy it more. I just get the sense you can enjoy it more because not everybody has to be a fucking expert about things. Like you got to break down every little thing. It's like, just sit back and enjoy the stories. Let these guys do their job. You are a fan, sit back and enjoy it. Not everything has to be dissected in 100 different ways.
There you go. Perfect.
All right, let's go to the next one. 2 Hall of Famers. Tell me about the Crusher and Mad Dog. I'm going to love this one.
And Joe and Chris, we have seen this on YouTube so many times. We've talked about it on the show. The feud between Mad Dog Vachon and the Crusher was legendary. Of course, they eventually wound up teaming up with each other, as most enemies eventually do in wrestling. There's Crusher in all his glory. That wasn't necessarily off the Mad Dog Vachon.
He was just eating strawberries. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, he kind of missed his mouth there with the fork of the strawberry. But the angle is legendary. People still talk about dog, and he apparently got into the same strawberry pit. But Crusher was working over the dog, ran him into a ring post. The dog bladed and unfortunately went a little bit too deep. Crusher he didn't notice or he just wasn't paying attention, because he continued to work on the spurting blood injury of Mad Dog Vachon, kept pounding away at it. The only guy who realized apparently how serious it was Roger Kent doing the announcing, and Roger yelled and screamed for, let's get some help for this guy. He's going to bleed to death or what have you. Mad Dog wound up with 26 stitches that night. It was legitimately a very serious injury. And to this day, I don't know what Crusher was thinking.
When we revived the AWA library and the series of pay-per-views, that match was one that I targeted for one of the early shows because of how big of an angle it was back at the time. And when I was fortunate enough to find it in the AWA library, that was one of the tapes that Vern didn't record over, thankfully. But I watched that and I was just like, oh my God. So I was on Roger Kent's side. Somebody get out there, stop Crusher. Crusher didn't know that Mad Dog had cut so deep. So he just kept going to try to build on this angle. And you look at, if go and look at the clip, it's somebody had posted the pay-per-view that I had produced. It's on YouTube, that I know for a fact. But when you watch it, Crusher was absolutely insane. He had those wild Crusher eyes going, and he was attacking Mad Dog. And I'm sitting there going, oh shit, he really Mad Dog is in trouble here. Quick side note on that angle. I've said it before. The very first main event that I ever attended as a very small child, I was guessing about 4 or 5 years old, somewhere in that range. If I'm off on the dates, sorry, but I'm going by memory of a young child. First main event, St. Paul Auditorium, Crusher versus Mad Dog in a cage. I was hooked.
Well, you can't get any bigger than that. I mean, when you're a kid, like that's that's your big time moment, right? I mean, that's your two legends, your two icons in maybe the steel cage used to be what they call the blow off match. Now you got all sorts of matches. It was a steel cage. That was it.
And Chris, you got to remember too, the use of the blade was still kayfabe back then.
Mm-hmm.
It was about 15 years from being exposed. So nobody was getting on any internet that didn't exist back in the time and saying, boy, did he cut himself too deeply. They thought Crusher rammed this guy into a post and damn near killed him. So again, different era. The believability of wrestling was off the charts.
And as a quick side note on that, no, they did not use blood capsules.
Oh, please. Yeah.
It was a blade inside their taped wrists. In fact, if you look back a lot of the old footage, if you saw a guy that came to the ring with taped wrists, you knew. Oh, by the way, and he never really did tape his wrists. I even recognized that as it's like, yep, we're getting blood on this one. Loved
it. Speaking of something that it's not blood, but it might be more painful than blood. Tell me about Larry Hennig and Hank Meadows' sunburn.
Oh, we've talked about this one before, and it's a legendary moment on All-Star Wrestling. Hank Meadows, not to be confused with another Hank Meadows, who I believe we're going to have a picture of here in a moment. Hank Meadows weighed about $120, dripping wet. That's Hank Meadows, the chef at WTCN TV. So
good, because I wanted you to give me. I saw this picture and I desperately wanted context on this.
Yeah,
that one I knew Mick would clarify.
Love it. It's not Jackie Gleason. That is in fact Hank Meadows, who had a cooking show on Channel 11, shared the same studio as the All-Star Wrestling, though. So in a sense, that Hank Meadows did have a tie-in. But this particular Hank Meadows that got into the ring with Larry Hennig was about $120. He had skin about as pale as Sheamus, and he had bleach blonde hair. And this guy, he looked like a Q-tip. And that's Hank. That was Hank. Hank Meadows, and that's the way he got into the ring to wrestle Larry Hennig at All-Star Wrestling. Yeah, just like that. Stayed out in the sun over there at Lake Calhoun a little bit too long before he came in to wrestle Larry. It was a 2 out of 3 fall match. And Hank came in there, and he looked like a picket fence that had been painted red, but with a couple of spots missing. And Hank, unfortunately, felt the wrath of Larry Hennig. Larry enjoyed the fact that Hank was sunburned. Larry did. Let me put it this way: Hank Meadows was covered in handprints from Larry Hennig at the end of the first fall.
Ooh.
Larry unloaded chop after chop to Hank Meadows, as if to say, "What the fuck are you doing, going over to Lake Calhoun and then coming over here to wrestle?" Hank Meadows could not appear for the second fall. Larry Hennig, to my knowledge, was the only guy in the history of the AWA that won by forfeit due to sunburn. And poor Hank, he looked like he should be on a butcher shelf someday, like in the front case with the rest of the hamburger. And of all people, not Larry Hennig. If you're going to get in the ring with somebody else that day, well, you might survive. But Larry took full advantage of the fact that Hank Meadows was lobster-like, and poor Hank. Boom, one after another, and yeah.
Knowing Larry as I did, and I got to add Kurt into there. I've got to believe that when he saw Hank Meadows come in like that, that was all intentional. I mean, it basically an in-ring rib to just start smacking this guy. And I guarantee you Larry in his mind was laughing his ass off with every single chop.
Oh, and I'm telling you.
That sounds so painful. Like, oh my God. the whole thought of somebody having to forfeit because of a sunburn. I know it's such a jerk thing to think about, but it's so funny to think about.
Yeah, I don't know if he legitimately had like 3rd-degree burns or something, or if he just scared shitless and didn't want to go back in the ring and give Larry another shot at it. But a great memory. That would be 1970s ish AWA.
Give me a day. Give me a location. And how long was the match? Tell me.
I'm not going to tell you. I could tell you, but I'm not going to because I want to antagonize. I just want to needle, certain people out there that,
I need details, Mick Arch.
No, I'm no authority. I'm no expert.
Ballpark it. No, fine. Screw you then. Let's just move on. Okay. The East-West connection. I got to admit, the more that we do these shows, and the more that I've watched on YouTube, the more I really appreciate the combination of Adrian Adonis and Jesse Ventura. Tell me about the George Kowalski and Kenny J.
Adrian Adonis and Jesse Ventura. Adrian, of course, was the workhorse in the ring. Jesse was the workhorse on the microphone. They were going to be headed out east. They were going to be leaving the AWA for a little while. And there they are. There they are, Adrian and Jesse in all their glory. They were going to be headed to New York. So there was, it needed to be a setup for them to leave the area. And what better way than to have Wally come out and suspend them? And the best way to suspend them was to have them lose a fall to Kenny J and George Scrap Iron Kowalski as Roger Kent screamed, "All Gotham will be dark tonight." When Kenny and George went over, I believe, I don't recall specifically, I think it was Adrian that got pinned. I'm not positive. At any rate, there's Scrap Iron. God love him. George Kowalski, one of the all-time classic guys in the business. And his tag team partner, equally as great and as wonderful a guy, the late sodbuster Kenny J. Well, at any rate, after Adrian and Jesse lost the fall on a sunset flip to Kenny J and George Kowalski, they went berserk. And they beat up George and Kenny so badly, Al DeRusha came in the ring and got stomped on, and no soul to stomp from Adrian Adonis. And Wally Carbo, of course, the height of all insults, they tore Wally's blazer. They tore it right off of him, which may have been more painful than even the Hank Meadows sunburn. And at that point, Wally, you are suspended and true, not through, TH. You're suspended and true. Get out of here. And they did. They went to New York, but one of the all-time great angles. I love it. I love it. I love it.
That was another match that fortunately was not recorded over and was part of those AWA pay-per-views. I don't remember that happening. I must have missed that episode. And of course, no internet, no, replays and so forth. But when I found that match, I knew immediately that needed to be included. Yeah. In regards to the East-West connection, Mick, you hit it right. In my opinion, those two complemented each other as good as, if not better than, any tag team to me that the AWA had. Hercules Cortez and Red Bastien I could include in there possibly, but Jesse, magic on the mic, and Adrian, God, could he work in the ring, even when he ballooned up and became the alter ego that a lot of fans remember from the mid '80s. The pink froofy, however you want
the flowery, more
the larger version of Gorgeous George.
Yeah. And I like what you said about tag teams there, Joe, where we look at them now and a lot of them happen to be similar in skill set, but I feel like the ones when we're talking about these angles, they were two different individuals. The dynamics work because they were so different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it. And you have more of them now that they're teamed together first thing that pops in mind, like the Fabulous Ones. You know, the two guys, they looked alike. They were like twins rather than a team.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing you got to add to this is that they gave George and Kenny a real shine back then, because these guys had been so loyal. And if you were going to have two guys go over at least one fall on Adonis and Ventura, what more beloved guys than Kenny and George? The crowd went apeshit. They just loved it.
Yes, and this just proves that, yes, Kenny J and George Scrap Iron Kowalski did actually win matches.
They did. That's correct.
And this is when the enhancement talent getting a win actually meant something. It catapulted into something. Like, guy gets one now, and then like 2 weeks later, it's forgotten about.
Yeah, and we've got more stories like that with the enhancement talent getting a win as we proceed in this show.
Yep, and I know Joe and I were just chatting here, Mick, while you were talking about that. It's just kind of a sidebar here, live production meeting. We were going to do 2 shows, but we've still got so much to do. Do we want to do 3 shows with this? Because I don't want to rush through things, but this way, because we've got a few that we want to get through here, but I want to make sure each one of them gets their time. We let it breathe. You just want to do three shows instead of 2?
I absolutely would, and that's just barely scraping the surface. I want to just implore everybody, if you think we're missing your angle or your favorite memory, we're going to get to it. There is so much in the history of the AWA, and I think we can easily get 3 shows worth of memories. So I would encourage people, let's keep going. If you got a memory from All-Star Wrestling, send it to that email address, the AWAunleashed@gmail.com. And in show 2 or show 3, we'll try to get to it. I'm all for it.
You got my vote.
All right. AWAunleashedpodcast@gmail.com.
There we go.
Jesus Christ. At least give them the right email address. Sorry. My mic was on. Sorry. Let's get to the Bob Geiger and Skylolo.
Bob Geiger and Skylolo. Again, this is not a lot of people remember this one, but I sure as hell do. Texas Bob Geiger, who of course was a great AWA wrestler, great amateur wrestler out of Iowa, former NWA president, Bob Geiger, very close with Vern Gagne. When Bob came into the AWA area, he was a heel, tag team champion, very, very tough guy. Bob was from Algona, Iowa, and somehow or other he wound up being Texas Bob Geiger. Well, it's wrestling. Ivan Koloff was Canadian, and all of a sudden he was from Moscow. But Bob Geiger had kind of a short fuse, and he is listening on the sidelines while midget wrestler, or small person as they like to say today, Skylolo, was being interviewed in the interview area by Marty O'Neill. That's not Baron von Raschke's kindergarten picture. That is Skylolo, ladies and gentlemen. And Sky, had a voice like he was on helium. And he was also Canadian, French Canadian. So when Sky talked, and seriously, I'm not being disrespectful, he sounded like a French Canadian munchkin. Yeah, he really did. And so he's cutting this promo with Marty O'Neill with the interview backdrop.
Hold on. I'm gonna shut my eyes, Mick. Give me the Skylolo.
Bonjour. Okay, so that's kind of the way that Sky would talk. So he's doing this promo.
I tried, Joe. I tried.
Well, what do you want me to do? My throat to get stuck like that, which you guys would love, but so Sky was going a little bit long, like I am in this segment, and Texas Bob came in and picked up Skylolo by the throat. Now, ladies and gentlemen, no footage of this exists, so you gotta picture this now. Here's Skylolo being hoisted up by Texas Bob Geiger by the throat, and Sky is still facing the camera. His eyes are bugging out of his head, and Texas Bob throws Skylolo into the ring, which was about 15, 20 feet away from the interview area. Well, you didn't see Sky's trajectory or the tail of the cat, but you saw the aftermath, which was Skylolo laying in the ring, and as Sky is going up, the last glimpse you had, he honest to God looked like a missile. I mean, this poor guy, you see him going out of camera range. He's flying about 35 miles an hour to the ring. And Chris, I think you have another photograph, if I'm not mistaken, not necessarily of that particular incident, but Sky apparently at some point wound up in the same position. There, look at Sky there. That's Sky on the left. And midget wrestler Little Beaver, always one of my favorite names in wrestling. Little Beaver is attending to Sky. But I assure you, that's kind of the way that Sky wound up when Bob Geiger threw him 30 feet from the interview area into the ring. So Sky, I guess, was used to it, looking like a long dart. But, in this particular incident with Texas Bob, that interview was, pardon the expression, cut short.
Classic. I don't remember that one, but
nobody does.
Yeah, I mean, but what year was that about, Mick? Was that 60?
That would be probably 62, 63.
Yeah, my family wasn't even in the country yet, so
yeah, poor Sky. It's not a good thing.
I mean, I've heard other stories of like Skylolo when they would be on road trips, they would put the little people in the trunk of the car, and then they're driving down the road, they'd pop open the trunk, and all of a sudden you'd see a couple of little moons appear from the back of the trunk. But then when they would shut the trunk back down, of course, the boys that were driving, they'd start ribbing them. They'd slam on the brakes, and all of a sudden you just hear tumbling into the back of the car. Anyway,
you didn't have contraband in your trunk when you crossed the border back then. You had the little people.
Yeah.
You had the Skylolos and Little Beavers of the world.
You never want to take a Little Beaver across state borders.
No. Oh God, no.
No. Let's get into something that's a little more serious here, guys. Greg Gagne, Black Jack Lanza, and Bobby Heenan.
This was great. And it was so simply done. Bobby Heenan is out there for an interview, and he's, he's promoting a tag team partner, a mystery partner that he's going to be bringing to the Twin Cities to wrestle against the High Flyers in a match. There's Bobby in his days as a commentator. Innocent Bobby Heenan. I'm sure he didn't mean any harm. But he was kind of teasing who this mystery partner was. And the mystery partner turned out to be Black Jack Lanza. Well, Greg Gagne was a little tired of Bobby Heenan playing games with who his mystery partner was going to be. There's Black Jack in all his glory, one of the toughest guys in the history of the business. Greg came out and he slapped Bobby Heenan across the face in the interview area. And at the time, man, that was something. And even Gene Okerlund was just absolutely appalled. Look at Greg. Look at Greg there. He's got that look in his eye. That looks like the kind of a guy that would come out and weasel slap some guy on television. But he did it to Bobby Heenan. And again, the simplicity of the angle to get it over. Just slap Heenan across the face. And for playing games and not revealing who the tag team partner was, brilliant.
Again, just love the simplicity of it. And I mean, that angle, it's easy. When you have Bobby Heenan involved, you're going to have a successful angle. Period. Got nothing else to add to that. Not saying that Greg and Jim didn't do great at it, because they did, but you throw in Bobby Heenan and you throw in the simplicity, absolutely brilliant.
Well, I think that shows the talent of somebody like a Bobby Heenan, like a Greg Gagne, like a Black Jack Lanza, where kind of going back to the beginning of the show, Mick, the simplicity, but then also the ability for those guys to make it work when it's just so basic. Because there are probably, some people out there probably could not make it work. You need all the layers and the bells and whistles. To me, it's all about how you execute it, and that falls squarely on the people in the ring.
These days, a guy will study his promo for 45 minutes or an hour beforehand in the locker room to make sure he's got every line down right. This was one take. Greg, go out and slap Bobby. Bobby, sell it, and that's all it took.
And it sounds so much easier. It sounds so much easier. It's like, this is what you tell them. They go out and do it. It's not overcomplicating it.
Yeah, of course.
The talent would have bullet points. Okay, here's the town.
Yeah.
Here are the sponsors. Vern would tell them, here's my buddies that are going to be in that area. Make sure you tell them. Just hit the points. Add in your own flair, your own taste of what you want to do for your character and deliver it. And way back, this was all live. And I mean, the stuff today is live as well. But as Mick said, they're given the full script. And sometimes they can pull it off. And sometimes it's like, quit reading the fucking teleprompter when there's not a teleprompter there.
Well, because if you've got these recorded promos, these scripts, you go out, you screw up a line, you lose yourself. If you're there in the moment, you can kind of think about what you can feel it organically. But if somebody screws up a line, they have to go back and you know, you got to try and figure out where you're going to go. You can react off the crowd. I mean, we see it done all the time now.
Well, and again, some talent, some wrestlers have the ability to memorize the script, and then if they screw something up, they're talented enough to be able to cover for it.
Yes.
And you never know it, but you have some who you can see it's like, well, why is the smoke coming out of their ears? They're trying to think of their next line rather than being able to deliver it in an effective and personable way, like this is coming directly from them, from their heart, from their mind. So not dissing any of the talent today.
No, okay, it's just a different time. It's just a different time. I mean, things are just done differently.
Exactly, and much like it was back in the day. Some guys you should put on the mic. Some guys just keep off the mic.
Yeah. All right, let's get to one more here, guys, and then we'll wrap it up. And again, we were going to do 3 shows or 2 shows. We're actually going to do 3. So we're going to do 3 shows. This is going to be the end of show 1. And if you've got one, we're not going in any particular order. Email us, awaunleashedpodcast@gmail.com. I'll make sure that I put up a banner for it next week, so that way people have that information. This one is very interesting to me, and this is a lot of people remember this, and this one's fairly newer in AWA history. Stan the Lariat Hansen and Wally Carbo.
The reason I love this is because of how ludicrous it really was when you hear Stan's explanation. This was Stan's initial foray into the AWA. He kind of came in and out a few times. But Stan Hansen, and there he is. And what's good about this is Stan is actually facing the camera. He doesn't have his glasses on, but the lights must be bright enough where he knew the direction of the camera. But Stan is involved in an angle on television. He's teaming up with Bobby Duncombe. And I believe they are wrestling Tom Stone and Steve Olszewski back in the day. And of course, the heels go crazy, Hansen and Bobby Duncombe. And Wally Carbo makes his way to the ring because Wally's had enough. And he pulls himself up on the ring apron and he's yelling at Stan Hansen, get out of here, or whatever he's yelling over and over again. Stan went over and forearm shot Wally Carbo to the chest. Wally sold it like he was hit with a dum-dum bullet. He went down on the ring apron. He was quickly attended to by all the wrestlers, including, I believe, referee Khosrow Vaziri at the time. And there's Wally. Look at this. This grandfatherly type individual, never heard a fly in his life. Stan Hansen pops Wally Carbo. They carried Wally out, and it was really interesting to see the crew carry Wally out because Wally's stomach was not the smallest in the world, and it was kind of heaving in and out, like Wally was a harpoon whale as they carried him off camera. But Stan Hansen's excuse was legendary. He said, I just came to the, and I'm not going to do his drawl, but he said, I just came to the territory. I'm in the ring. I'm doing my business. And I didn't know who this guy was. He could have been some crazed fan. He could have been another wrestler coming into the ring and attacked me. So I defended myself. And there you had it. And I'm telling you, it's out there on YouTube. You got to look at the bump that Wally takes, because seriously, it's like he went through a trapdoor, fled on the ring apron. All the wrestlers come out, police officers, everything else to tend to Wally. And Stan Hansen claimed he did not know who Wally Carbo was. Oh. Who did not know who Wally Carbo was back in the day? Joe, you knew.
Oh, of course. No, if it was Stanley Blackburn, I get it, because people still think that he didn't exist, but he did.
Yeah.
Did Wally, do you recall Wally ever taking a bump in another situation? This situation is the only one that I remember Wally taking a bump.
You know, I think that was about it. Back in the day, Wally was a referee. Before there was TV wrestling or what have you, he would take bumps when the guys would attack him. But as far as on television, I don't recall, over the years if Wally took another bump. Wow. One might have been enough for him.
And that just adds to the allure, and it just makes it look much more vicious than, if he did it all the time.
Chris, in this day and age, if they would try to do this and Wally got popped, the fans would give Stan a standing ovation. They would think it was the greatest thing in the world. Hit him again, one more time or whatever. But back in the day, even the fans in the studio, if you see this on tape, they're appalled. Oh my God, he just hit Wally Carbo. This guy really is berserk, because now he hit the authority figure, and it was believable. And again, you're going back late 70s, I believe, maybe early 80s I think it was late 70s when Stan first came in.
Yep. And Mick, I understand what you're saying about how the crowd or the fans would be different today. And you're always going to have a few idiots out there. I'm going to think, and I'm going to say that Wally was so beloved by the fans that if it fast forward to today, if it happened, I still think there would be heat on Hansen. You'd have an idiot or two, pop him again. Mm-hmm. But when Wally came either to the ring or onto the interview set, you knew you were going to be entertained, because Wally was like Laurel and Hardy rolled into one. He really was. He was this. Well, I think we've got another angle that we can talk about in the future about when Wally came out for an Ivan Putski interview.
Yeah.
We'll save that one for another time. But Wally was so beloved by the fans back then. Maybe it's just me wanting to believe that if it happened today, they would have the same reaction. I would hope anyway.
Well, Wally, as you said, was a beloved character, and anytime Wally did come out on TV, something was going to happen. There was either a fine, a suspension, or a major announcement. When Wally could come out and do 15 minutes just trying to say the name Nomalini, let alone, getting an angle over. So this was legendary, but it's out there. You can take a look at it. Wally, the poor guy, God, he looked, boom, and he's out.
Well, and one final thing, and then we can wrap this up, Chris and Mick, but anytime that Wally Carbo's name gets brought up to me, instantly, there's going to be fines and suspensions. Probably one of the most famous phrases from AWA All-Star Wrestling was there's going to be fines and suspensions.
Yeah, I at my work, I work with Steve Thompson, who is a massive wrestler. We always talk old school wrestling fans, and he will say on the air, there will be fines and suspensions, and he knows it will pop me. And that it shows the influence, right? Some people say it, they don't even know where it comes from. Think about that.
Yeah, he was a cultural icon. Whether or not you were a wrestling fan, you're hearing the phrase fines and suspensions even today. And one of Wally's other great lines was when he told Bobby Heenan or Jerry Blackwell, I believe it was. He said, "I've got a fate worse than death for you. You're gonna get a ring with Mad Dog Rashad." It was a fate worse than death for Jerry Blackwell to get into the ring with Mad Dog Vachon. Gotta love Wally Carbo. And they're legendary. They're Wallyisms. That's what the boys would call them, is Wallyisms.
We could literally do an entire episode on
I was just thinking about that.
And
I was just thinking about that.
Stories. I mean,
some of them would be saved for an After Dark episode. Trust me.
Yeah, they're Uncle Milty. I mean, Uncle Wally. Legendary behind the scenes stories.
We'll have to do. Yeah, we'll have to do it. Want to thank everybody for this. Again, this is 1 out of 3.
Wow.
If you want to support us, hit us up on YouTube, subscribe, hit the subscribe button, like, review. We're on Apple Podcast, we're on Amazon, we're on Google, we're on Spotify. We're pretty much everywhere that you can get your podcast. So you guys got anything else to add before we wrap it up?
No, just encouraging the people once again, AWA Unleashed podcast at gmail.com. If you've got a memory from All-Star Wrestling, and we're talking the studio shows. We're not talking the big arena shows. We're not talking the Showboat. Something that you saw in All-Star Wrestling in those good old studio days that you want us to talk about on the air, let us know, and we'll get to it. We absolutely will. This is fun stuff.
So no Whitewater?